cold, honor, and desire. The Apache woman chose to sleep next to the cowboy. The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the jagged mountains, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and gold. The air was dry and warm, but as evening approached, a cold wind began to stir, signaling the arrival of night. The desert was vast, empty, and silent except for the occasional cry of a distant bird or the soft rustling of tumbleweeds. This wilderness was home to the Apache people, a tribe known for their courage, wisdom, and strong connection to the land. Among them was a young woman named Naya. She was not just any member of her tribe. She carried the strength of her ancestors in her heart and the wisdom of years in her sharp eyes. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders in a single braid, and her movements were quiet but deliberate, like a shadow moving through the sun-drenched sand. Naya had been scouting the riverbanks for signs of game or intruders when she noticed something unusual. A lone figure lay in the distance, half hidden among the rocks and the tall, dry grass. At first, she thought it might be a deer or some other wild animal, but as she moved closer, her heart skipped a beat. It was a man, clearly a cowboy, from the way his boots and worn-out hat looked. He was badly hurt, with cuts on his arms and dirt on his face. He struggled to breathe, and his movements were weak and uncoordinated. Naya's instincts told her to turn back and leave him, as her people had been taught to be cautious of outsiders. Cowboys were not always kind to the Apache, and many had harmed her people in the past. But another voice inside her whispered something different, one of honor and compassion. No one deserved to die alone in the harsh desert if there was a chance to help them. She slowed her steps, keeping low to the ground, making sure he didn't see her too soon. Her heart pounded as she studied him, trying to determine the extent of his injuries. He was barely conscious, and his clothing was torn in several places. It was clear that he had been ambushed or attacked by someone, perhaps outlaws who roamed these lands. Naya's first thought was to leave him and return to the safety of her tribe, but the thought of letting him die in the cold desert night was unbearable. She reminded herself of the values her people had taught her: courage, honor, and the protection of life whenever possible. Carefully, she approached him, keeping her distance at first. "Are you alive?" she whispered in the Apache language, unsure if he could hear her. The man groaned and opened his eyes slowly, revealing a pair of deep, tired brown eyes that reflected fear, pain, and confusion. Who are you?" he asked weakly, his voice barely audible. Naya did not answer immediately. Instead, she motioned for him to stay still and waited to see if he could manage to move. He tried to sit up but winced in pain, clutching his side. Naya could see that he was bleeding and that some of his injuries were serious. Without a second thought, she began to assess the wounds, using the small knowledge of medicine she had learned from the elders of her tribe. She tore a strip from her own clothing to bind a deep cut on his arm and carefully cleaned the dirt and blood. The man winced and muttered something under his breath, but Naya did not flinch. She worked with calm hands, careful not to make the pain worse. As she did, she realized that this man, though a stranger, was not her enemy. He had probably been careless or unlucky to end up in this state, and now he was at her mercy. She knew that if she abandoned him, the desert could very well take his life before morning. The thought of that was unbearable. Night was falling fast. The desert grew colder with each passing hour, and Naya knew that staying outside without fire would be dangerous for both of them. The man shivered uncontrollably, his teeth chattering as the cold seeped into his bones. Naya gathered dry wood and some leaves and quickly built a small fire, making sure it was safe from spreading. The warmth from the fire began to ease some of the man's discomfort, and he leaned slightly closer, as if drawn to the heat. Naya remained cautious, sitting a short distance away, watching him carefully. She was aware of the unspoken tension in the moment. A stranger, weak and helpless, now depended on her. It was unusual for her to feel any sort of attachment so quickly, But there was something about him that stirred a sense of responsibility, and something deeper that she could not quite name. As the fire flickered and cast dancing shadows around them, Naya spoke softly to calm him. "You will live," she said quietly, though her words were as much for herself as for him. "I will not let you die here. Stay calm and do not move too much." The man nodded faintly, too tired and in too much pain to respond with words. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was filled with the quiet rhythm of survival. The crackling fire, the rustling of dry leaves, and their shared struggle for warmth created a bond that needed no words. Hours passed. The cold night deepened, and Naya noticed that the man's shivering was getting worse. She knew she could not leave him out here alone. Carefully, she extended a blanket toward him, a gesture that said more than words could. The man looked at it, unsure at first, and then slowly moved closer, accepting her help. Naya made sure to keep a respectful distance but allowed him to share the warmth of the fire. For the first time that night, there was a small sense of relief in her chest. She could see that he was gaining strength, even if slowly. Throughout the night, Naya watched him with unwavering attention. She noted every movement, every breath, making sure he was stable. She also began to notice small details about him. The way his hair fell over his forehead, the lines on his face that spoke of hard days and long journeys, and the quiet courage in his eyes despite his current helpless state. She realized that this man, though an outsider, possessed qualities that her tribe valued: bravery, resilience, and an ability to endure suffering without complaint. A strange admiration began to grow in her heart. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the desert in soft pinks and blues, the cowboy had stabilized. He was still weak, but the immediate danger had passed thanks to Naya's care. She looked at him quietly, feeling a mix of relief and curiosity. Who was he? Why had he been out here alone? And why did her heart feel a little lighter now that he had survived the night? These questions would remain unanswered for now, as the day required action and vigilance. Naya knew that they could not stay by the river forever. The desert was unforgiving and they both needed shelter and food. She extended her hand, helping him to his feet, and for the first time they spoke directly. "You must be careful," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "The desert is not forgiving to the careless. Follow me and stay close. I will guide you." The man nodded, grateful and slightly embarrassed by his dependence on a stranger. As they began their slow journey together, Naya felt the weight of her decision. She had chosen to help an outsider, to break from the caution her people often demanded. Yet she felt no regret. Her actions were guided by honor, compassion, and a sense of responsibility. And deep down, she felt something stirring, a connection that was difficult to define, yet undeniable. The desert stretched endlessly before them, with its rocky outcrops, sand dunes, and hidden dangers. The journey ahead would be challenging, but Naya was determined to see it through. She led the cowboy through the safest paths she knew, occasionally stopping to let him rest or drink from hidden streams. The nights were still cold, and the bond between them grew stronger with each shared challenge. Though they were strangers, their shared struggle had forged a quiet understanding, a beginning of trust that neither of them could ignore. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden warmth across the desert, Naya could not help but glance at him. He was still weak, but his eyes now held a spark of life. And though she would never admit it aloud, she felt a stirring in her heart. A mix of respect, curiosity, and something more, something that perhaps neither of them fully understood yet. The desert had brought them together in an unexpected way, forcing them to rely on one another, and in that reliance, something powerful and fragile had begun to grow. Naya's thoughts wandered briefly to her tribe and the rules she had always followed. She knew that they might question her actions, that some might see helping a stranger as a betrayal of their ways. But she also knew that honor was not only in following rules blindly. It was in courage, in compassion, and in protecting life when it needed protection most. And tonight, she had acted with honor, and in doing so, had allowed herself to glimpse something new, the beginning of a bond that could change both of their lives forever. By midday, they reached a small, shaded area where Naya decided they could rest and regain strength. She built another small fire, prepared some food from her supplies, and tended to his wounds again. The cowboy, now able to speak more clearly, thanked her, but Naya waved it off. "It was necessary," she said simply. "We survive in this desert by helping those who are in need. That is all." Yet in her heart, she knew there was more to it, something that neither words nor fire could fully explain. The sun began its slow descent once again, and as the desert prepared for another cold night, Naya and the cowboy sat together quietly. There was no need for words. The shared experience, the struggle, and the mutual respect had created a connection deeper than either could express. That night, as they huddled near the fire, sharing warmth against the chill, Naya understood that sometimes honor and compassion could lead one to unexpected places, and that even a stranger could become a part of one's story in the harshest of deserts. The desert seemed endless. As Naya and the cowboy, whose name she now knew was Jack, began to move together. The early morning sun was warm, but the heat of the day would soon become harsh and unrelenting. Naya led the way, her steps sure and confident on the rocky terrain, while Jack followed closely, careful not to stumble. Each step he took reminded him of the fragility of life in this wild, open land, and he silently thanked the woman who had saved him. Naya kept a watchful eye on him, noting his fatigue and the way he still winced from his injuries. She knew the desert offered no second chances. A wrong step, a lack of water, or a sudden storm could end life quickly. Despite her caution, she sensed a quiet admiration from Jack. He seemed to understand that she was not just leading him through the desert, she was protecting him, watching over him with a sharp alertness that spoke of experience, strength, and wisdom. The path they followed was not easy. Sharp rocks jutted from the sand, and small cacti lined the narrow trails. Naya often stopped to point out dangers, loose rocks that could twist an ankle, hidden snakes resting in the shade, or thin patches of sand that could make one sink unexpectedly. Jack tried to keep pace, his strong frame moving carefully, but he was still weak from the night before. The sun climbed higher and sweat ran down his face, yet he pressed on, inspired by her calm determination and quiet guidance. By mid-morning, the heat became intense. The desert was unforgiving under the blazing sun, and even Naya, accustomed to these lands, felt its weight. She found a small shaded area near a cluster of rocks and signaled Jack to rest. As he collapsed onto the ground, she unrolled a piece of cloth and offered it to him for shade. Jack accepted it with a weary nod, grateful for her care. They drank water from a small leather pouch she had carried, and the cool liquid brought relief to their parched throats. During the brief rest, Naya observed Jack. He was a cowboy, yes, but not the rough, brash kind she had expected. His movements, though slowed by injury, were careful and thoughtful. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were simple, honest, and respectful. There was a humility in him that intrigued Naya. She felt a subtle pull toward him, though she could not understand it fully. It was strange, almost confusing, an unfamiliar warmth growing in her chest as she watched him struggle and survive. The desert afternoon dragged on. Naya led Jack through narrow passes and over low hills, always keeping an eye on the horizon. She knew that storms could rise without warning, and predators lurked quietly in the shadows. Despite the challenges, there was a rhythm to their journey. Naya would walk ahead, checking the ground for hazards, while Jack followed, careful to mirror her movements. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their bond began to strengthen. It was not yet a bond of friendship, but one of trust, an understanding that in this unforgiving place they depended on each other. As the sun began its descent, the temperature dropped quickly. The desert night approached with a sudden chill, and the wind picked up, carrying grains of sand that stung the skin. Naya knew they needed to prepare for the cold. She found a sheltered area between two large boulders and began to gather dry wood for a fire. Jack assisted where he could, collecting small sticks and stones, but Naya directed every move. She had lived her life understanding the desert, and she knew how dangerous it could be if the night caught them unprepared. Once the fire was lit, its warmth spreading through the small sheltered area, they both sat near it. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on the rocks and illuminating their tired faces. The cold wind continued to bite at the edges of their shelter, and Jack instinctively moved closer, though Naya maintained a careful distance. She was aware of the unspoken tension, the closeness that the night demanded. Survival required warmth, but she also had to balance it with her sense of honor and self-respect. Hours passed, and they shared the fire in silence. The desert at night was alive with sounds, soft rustlings, distant howls, and the whisper of wind through the rocks. Jack's breathing gradually evened out, and Naya noticed that his strength was slowly returning. She felt a quiet satisfaction. Her careful attention had kept him alive, and she was proud, though she did not express it aloud. For her, actions mattered more than words. Survival and protection were their own kind of honor. Despite the silence, there was a conversation of sorts happening between them. Naya's eyes were steady, watching his every movement, and Jack's eyes reflected gratitude and something deeper, an awareness of her courage and skill. They did not need to speak. The fire, the cold, and the shared challenge created a connection stronger than any words could convey. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, but each passing hour only deepened the unspoken understanding between them. As the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Naya allowed herself to observe Jack more closely. His face, though tired and dirt-streaked, held a quiet strength. She noticed the lines of hardship etched into his features, the way his hands moved carefully over his injuries, and the resilience in his posture. There was something in him that resonated with her, a respect for life, a determination to endure, and an acknowledgement of the harsh reality around them. It was rare to meet someone so different from her people, yet so worthy of respect. The night grew colder. Jack shivered slightly, and Naya instinctively adjusted her position to share some of her warmth without compromising her own space. This was a delicate balance, keeping the distance of propriety while ensuring survival. For hours they stayed close to the fire, each aware of the other's presence. Naya's mind wandered briefly to her tribe, to the lessons she had learned from her elders about trust, courage, and honor. Helping a stranger in the desert was risky, but she reminded herself that true honor often required difficult choices. She had chosen compassion, and it had kept a life alive. Gradually, Jack began to relax. He looked at her with quiet appreciation, understanding that her actions were guided by both survival instinct and something deeper. Though he had been a stranger, he now felt a connection that he could not explain, a reliance on her wisdom, a gratitude for her protection, and perhaps a budding admiration. Naya, for her part, felt a strange comfort in his presence. The desert was a lonely place, and the shared challenge of survival created an unexpected companionship. As midnight approached, the cold became sharper. Naya pulled her blanket closer around herself but allowed Jack to take a portion for warmth. The gesture was simple, practical, and yet it carried an unspoken meaning. They sat together near the fire, sharing its heat and quieting their fears. The desert was vast and indifferent, but in that small circle of light and warmth, they had found safety, if only temporary. The hours passed slowly. Naya maintained a watchful eye, aware of every sound and movement around them. Jack, sensing her vigilance, remained still, trusting her guidance and protection. Their shared silence was peaceful, comforting, and strangely intimate. Each moment beside the fire strengthened the connection between them, though neither spoke of it. It was a bond built on survival, respect, and the unspoken acknowledgement of mutual reliance. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, the desert began to glow in soft pastels. Jack had recovered enough to move more freely, and Naya felt a quiet relief. They had survived the night, the cold, and the dangers of the desert together. She knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but this night had proven that they could rely on one another. The fire had burned low, leaving only embers, but the warmth they had shared would linger in their memories. Naya helped Jack to his feet, and they began to prepare for the day ahead. Water, food, and careful steps would be essential as they navigated the desert terrain. Yet beneath the practical concerns, a quiet connection had formed. It was not yet friendship, not yet love, but a recognition of something rare and valuable: trust, respect, and a shared experience that neither would forget. As they walked together, Naya reflected on the night. She had made a choice, an act of honor and compassion that had saved a life. And in doing so, she had discovered a new understanding of trust, courage, and human connection. The desert had tested them, forced them into closeness, and revealed something deeper in both of them. She did not yet know where this bond would lead, but she understood that it was real, significant, and worth protecting. The sun climbed higher, warming the desert sands and drying the morning dew. Naya led Jack carefully, always alert, always protective. Their journey was far from over, but the first night had proven something vital: that even in the harshest conditions, trust and courage could create connections that defied distance, danger, and difference. And as they moved forward, side by side, the desert seemed slightly less cold, and the path ahead, though challenging, felt a little brighter. The days in the desert stretched endlessly, with the sun beating down during the day and the cold creeping in at night. Naya and Jack traveled together, moving carefully across the shifting sands and rocky trails. Each step reminded them of the fragility of life in this vast wilderness. Jack had regained some strength, but his wounds still demanded caution. Naya moved with her usual confidence, always scanning the horizon for hidden dangers, yet she was aware of the growing tension, not from the desert but between themselves. It was subtle at first. Jack would glance at her when she wasn't looking, a mixture of admiration and curiosity in his gaze. Naya, in turn, felt an unexpected flutter in her chest whenever he spoke or laughed softly at something small and ordinary. Their interactions were still cautious. Naya maintained her distance, mindful of her tribe's values and the honor she carried in her heart. But in the quiet moments, beside the fire or under the shade of a rocky outcrop, she could not deny the pull she felt toward him. Traveling through the desert was more than just walking. It was a constant negotiation with nature. The sun was relentless, drying their lips and parching their throats, while the rocky paths tested their endurance. Jack struggled at times, stumbling over hidden rocks or slowing as fatigue hit him. Naya would pause and offer him water, steadying his arm and guiding his steps. Each gesture was practical, necessary for survival, but it carried an unspoken intimacy. Jack felt a growing respect for her strength and skill, realizing that she was not just a guide, she was a protector, someone whose presence made the harsh desert feel slightly less threatening. By mid-afternoon, they found a narrow canyon that offered temporary shade and a small pool of water. Naya signaled Jack to rest while she prepared a place where they could sit safely. She collected some stones to form a small fire pit and arranged dry brush carefully, mindful that a careless spark could spread quickly in the dry landscape. Jack helped as best he could, though his movements were slow and deliberate. Watching him, Naya felt a mixture of amusement and tenderness. He was strong in spirit, yet fragile in body, and that contrast made her awareness of him grow even stronger. As the fire flickered to life, Naya began to notice how Jack's gaze lingered on her, not in an obvious way, but in subtle glances that betrayed curiosity and admiration. She tried to ignore it, focusing on tending the fire and preparing a simple meal of dried meat and wild herbs. But inside, she was aware of a stirring she had not felt before. Her heart raced slightly when he spoke to her, even about ordinary matters like the direction they should take or the condition of their supplies. It was confusing and new, a mixture of respect, gratitude, and something that felt dangerously like desire. The desert night came quickly, colder than they had expected. Naya wrapped herself in her blanket but allowed Jack a portion as well. He accepted it with a grateful nod, settling near the fire while keeping a respectful distance. They did not speak much at first. The silence was filled with the sounds of the desert, soft rustling of leaves, distant cries of animals, and the crackle of fire. But the quiet carried an unspoken understanding. Each of them knew that they were relying on the other for survival. That reliance, small as it seemed, had already begun to create a bond that was difficult to ignore. Hours passed slowly. Naya watched Jack as he moved slightly to warm his hands over the fire. She noticed the way his eyes reflected the flames, the faint lines of fatigue still present on his face, and the quiet patience he showed in following her lead. Despite her best efforts to remain detached, she felt drawn to him, not only because of his vulnerability, but because of the respect and care he had shown her in turn. He had not taken advantage of the situation, had not acted arrogantly or intrusively. Instead, he had been patient, quiet, and thoughtful. That combination of qualities intrigued her deeply. In the moments before sleep, when the desert was at its coldest and most silent, Naya found herself observing him more closely than she had intended. The warmth of the fire was not enough to keep the chill from her skin, yet she noticed the small ways he tried to make himself comfortable without encroaching on her space. She realized that this cowboy, a complete stranger only days ago, had become someone she was beginning to care for. She struggled internally, questioning whether it was right to feel this way. Her tribe had strict rules about interactions with outsiders, yet her heart was pulling her in a direction she could not ignore. Jack, too, was aware of the tension, though he could not name it clearly. He had always been cautious around strangers, particularly women of the Apache tribe, knowing the history of mistrust between his kind and hers. But Naya was different. Her actions, her steady presence, and the calm confidence with which she guided him had earned his respect. He felt a growing admiration, tinged with something more personal, something he had not expected to feel in the harsh, unyielding desert. Each shared moment by the fire strengthened this unspoken connection. As the night deepened, the cold forced them even closer, though they remained careful. Naya adjusted the blanket so that Jack could share warmth without compromising her own dignity. The proximity was both practical and intimate, and she could not deny the subtle pull she felt. Her mind wrestled with conflicting thoughts. Honor demanded caution, tradition warned against attachment to outsiders, yet her heart whispered differently. She realized that desire and duty were not always separate. Sometimes they intertwined in ways that demanded careful navigation. They spoke in whispers occasionally, discussing the next steps, the terrain, and the water sources they had seen. Jack's voice was soft but steady, full of gratitude and quiet admiration for Naya's knowledge and courage. He had never met anyone like her, strong, capable, and unwavering in the face of danger. The desert had tested him, stripped away his pride, and left him dependent on someone he had only just met. Yet, rather than fear or frustration, he felt a strange comfort in her presence, a sense of safety he had not known for a long time. By midnight, the desert's cold was sharpest. Naya and Jack huddled near the fire, the warmth a small shield against the chill. The flickering flames highlighted their faces in soft, orange light. Jack's eyes met hers briefly, and Naya felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. It was not just the fire. It was the recognition that this stranger, this cowboy, had become significant in her life in ways she could not yet explain. She felt her heart respond to his quiet presence, a subtle longing that surprised and unsettled her. They slept fitfully, in shifts near the fire, each aware of the other's vulnerability. Nea's instincts remained sharp, watching for threats in the darkness, but she also allowed herself to feel the strange comfort of having Jack nearby. Survival in the desert was not just about strength and skill. It was also about companionship, trust, and the courage to allow someone into your world. That night, they both realized that the bond they were forming was more than mere necessity. It was the beginning of a connection that neither had expected. Morning came slowly, and with it, the first light painted the desert in soft shades of pink and gold. Nea stirred first, checking the fire and ensuring that Jack had slept safely. He moved slowly, stretching his arms and legs, but the fatigue of the journey still lingered. Their eyes met, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. The night had passed, they had survived, and the desert had brought them closer in ways neither had anticipated. A quiet acknowledgement passed between them, a recognition that their bond was deepening. As they prepared to continue their journey, Nea felt the first real awareness of desire mixed with duty. She had grown to care for Jack, yet she knew the importance of maintaining her honor. She could not act recklessly, nor could she allow her feelings to cloud her judgment. Every step forward would require balance, between survival and intimacy, between tradition and emotion. And yet, for the first time in her life, she sensed that such balance might be possible. The sun climbed higher and the heat returned, pressing down on them with relentless force. They moved cautiously, side by side, sharing the physical and emotional weight of the journey. Every step, every pause, every shared glance reinforced the growing connection between them. It was subtle, quiet, and often unspoken, but it was real. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had become a place of discovery, not just of survival, but of the fragile, complex bond that was forming between Nea and Jack. By evening, as they prepared for another cold night, Nea realized something profound. Desire and honor could coexist. She could care for this man, feel drawn to him, and still act with integrity. Her feelings were not a betrayal of her tribe or herself. They were a testament to her strength, her courage, and her capacity for empathy. And as the fire crackled and the desert night approached, she felt a quiet anticipation. The journey was far from over, but she knew that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The desert had grown quieter over the past few days, yet the tension between Nea and Jack had quietly intensified. Every step they took together, every shared meal or moment by the fire, had brought them closer, yet Nea could feel the weight of her responsibility pressing upon her. She had grown fond of Jack, perhaps even more than she was willing to admit, but her loyalty to her tribe and the values she had been raised with remained strong. She knew that every choice carried consequences, and the decision she was facing now was more than a matter of survival. It was a matter of honor, trust, and the quiet pull of the heart. By late afternoon, they reached a narrow valley with a small spring. The water was fresh, and the surrounding rocks provided some shelter from the harsh sun. Nea allowed Jack to rest and drink, carefully watching him as he bent to the water. He looked healthier than he had when she first found him, though still weary from the long journey. Nea gathered some firewood and arranged a place where they could sit safely. As she worked, she thought about the past few nights, about the shared cold, the silent glances, and the quiet trust that had grown between them. Jack watched her quietly, noticing how she moved with purpose and confidence, how her eyes constantly scanned the surroundings for danger, and how she carried herself with a strength that seemed to belong to the desert itself. He admired her, not just for her skill or bravery, but for the way she held herself, calm, steady, and wise. He knew that he had grown dependent on her guidance, yet he also felt a deep respect for her independence. The connection between them was subtle, a mixture of necessity, admiration, and something that neither had fully named. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Naya sat near the fire, thinking about the journey ahead. She knew they would have to travel far before reaching a safer area, and she also knew that the desert nights would grow colder. She glanced at Jack, who was quietly arranging some of their supplies. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment the air seemed to hold its breath. Naya could feel the pull of her own emotions, a quiet desire to be closer, to share warmth and comfort. Yet she reminded herself of her honor and the expectations of her people. The night settled over them, bringing with it a cold that cut through even the fire's warmth. Naya and Jack huddled near the flames, the flickering light illuminating their tired faces. She carefully adjusted the blanket, allowing him some warmth without compromising her own space. The proximity was both practical and intimate, and for the first time, Naya allowed herself to fully recognize the depth of her feelings. There was a tension between duty and desire, between tradition and the pull of the heart. She knew she could not ignore it any longer. Jack sensed the change in her, though he did not speak immediately. He had always been respectful, never pressing or demanding, yet he could feel the quiet closeness that had grown between them. The desert had forced them into proximity, had stripped away distractions, and had revealed truths that neither could deny. Jack's admiration for Naya had grown into something deeper, a desire not just to survive beside her but to share more of himself, to offer trust and warmth in return for hers. Hours passed in silence. The cold of the desert night intensified, and Naya felt the practical necessity of sharing warmth more urgently. She shifted closer, careful but deliberate, and allowed Jack to lean slightly against her side. The gesture was small, but it carried profound meaning. It was an acknowledgement of trust, of mutual reliance, and of the bond that had been quietly growing over the days. She felt a subtle thrill, a mixture of fear and anticipation, yet she did not pull away. Her heart recognized the moment as significant, a crossroads where honor and desire intersected. They spoke in low tones occasionally, discussing the path ahead and the supplies they carried. Each word carried weight, a careful balance of practicality and emotion. Jack's voice was calm, thoughtful, and patient, reflecting the same respect that had guided him from the start. Naya noticed the care in his speech, the gentleness behind his words, and she felt her affection deepen. It was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, about recognizing a bond that neither of them could ignore. As midnight approached, Naya felt a moment of vulnerability. The desert was silent, the fire flickering low, and the cold pressing against them from all sides. She allowed herself to lean closer to Jack, to share warmth not just out of necessity, but out of a growing desire to be near him. The tension between them was no longer subtle. It was a quiet, steady pulse that neither could deny. She realized that this closeness, this choice to allow herself to share space and warmth, was not dishonor. It was an act of courage and trust. Jack responded with quiet understanding. He did not overstep, did not demand more than she offered, yet his presence was comforting in a way that made the desert night less harsh. They shared stories of their pasts, of struggles and triumphs, of moments that had shaped them. Naya spoke cautiously, revealing just enough to share a part of herself, while Jack listened intently, sharing only what was necessary to build trust. The dialogue was slow, deliberate, and intimate, creating a space where they could be both vulnerable and strong. The night deepened, and the fire's warmth became their small refuge. Naya reflected on the meaning of honor, realizing that it was not rigid adherence to tradition, but the courage to act rightly even in unexpected circumstances. By allowing Jack into her world, by sharing warmth and trust, she had acted with honor, not betrayal. The desert had taught her that strength and compassion were not mutually exclusive, and that desire, when tempered with respect and care, could coexist with duty. Morning light broke over the horizon, casting soft hues across the desert sands. Naya and Jack stirred, feeling the residual warmth from the fire in each other. They had survived the night, grown stronger in body, and grown closer in spirit. The bond between them was undeniable, though unspoken, and both sensed that the coming days would demand even greater reliance on each other. Nea knew that a decision would soon be necessary, a choice between returning to her tribe and its expectations or embracing the unexpected connection she had found with Jack. By midday, the sun climbed high, and the desert's heat pressed upon them. Nea guided Jack carefully, choosing paths that offered shade and water whenever possible. Each step was a reminder of the challenges they faced, yet also of the strength they had gained from shared struggle. Jack moved with more confidence now, trusting her guidance fully, while Nea felt a quiet pride in his resilience. Together, they navigated the harsh terrain, each aware of the other's presence, support, and growing importance in their lives. As evening fell once again, the desert's chill returned. Nea and Jack settled near a small fire, preparing for another cold night. Nea adjusted her blanket, allowing him to share warmth without compromising her own dignity. The fire's glow illuminated their faces, revealing exhaustion, relief, and the quiet intensity of emotions that neither had fully expressed. Nea felt the first real awareness that her feelings were more than fleeting. She cared for Jack, and she felt a desire to be near him, to protect and share life with him. Jack, sensing the depth of her thoughts, responded with gentle attentiveness. He did not push boundaries, but he allowed closeness, understanding that trust was earned, not demanded. They shared quiet conversation, stories of the past and reflections on the present, each word strengthening the bond that had grown through shared hardship. The desert had forced them together, yet the connection was no longer simply a matter of survival. It had become a matter of choice, of mutual recognition and respect. As midnight approached, Nea made a decision. She would allow herself to act on her feelings, to embrace the trust, warmth, and connection that had grown between them. The choice was not made lightly. She understood the consequences, the questions from her tribe, and the complexity of crossing boundaries she had long respected. Yet she knew that to deny her heart now would be a betrayal of her own values. She chose to share the night with Jack, not out of weakness but out of courage, honesty, and respect for herself, for him, and for the bond they had created. The night passed with quiet intimacy. They huddled near the fire, sharing warmth, stories, and silent moments of understanding. The desert, vast and indifferent, seemed smaller, gentler, and more forgiving. Nea realized that honor could take many forms, that courage included the courage to care, to trust, and to act in accordance with both duty and desire. Jack understood the significance of her choice, and in response, he remained respectful, patient, and deeply appreciative. Together, they navigated the delicate balance between intimacy and propriety, creating a connection that was both profound and enduring. By dawn, the first rays of light painted the desert in soft shades of pink and gold. Nea and Jack stirred, feeling the strength of shared experience and mutual trust. The night had been a turning point, a moment where honor and desire intertwined, creating a bond that neither could ignore. Nea knew that the days ahead would test them further, but she felt a quiet confidence. They had faced the desert, faced danger, and faced the complexities of their own hearts, and they had emerged stronger together. The desert had witnessed much over the past days: harsh sun, bitter cold, and the quiet struggle for survival. But it had also witnessed something far more fragile and beautiful: the bond that had grown between Nea and Jack. Their journey had tested them physically, mentally, and emotionally, and it had brought them to a point where trust, respect, and the quiet stirrings of love could no longer be ignored. The night had passed with shared warmth, silent understanding, and the beginnings of something that both had felt but had not yet named aloud. Now, as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Both knew that the decisions they made in the coming days would shape the rest of their lives. Naya awoke first, careful not to disturb Jack, who still slept beside her, wrapped partially in the same blanket they had shared through the night. She studied his face, noting the traces of exhaustion mixed with renewed strength. The harsh desert had tested him, yet he had endured, showing patience, humility, and a quiet resilience. Her chest warmed, not just from the fire they had kept burning low, but from the realization that she had grown to care deeply for him. This bond, forged in shared hardship and tempered by respect, had become central to her life in ways she could not ignore. Jack stirred as the first light touched his face, blinking slowly and realizing Naya was watching him. There was no awkwardness, only a silent understanding, an acknowledgement of the shared journey and the trust that had grown between them. The desert around them was vast, yet it no longer felt lonely or hostile. In the midst of hardship, they had found one another, and the recognition of that connection was both comforting and empowering. Jack sat up, stretching slowly, and offered a faint smile. Naya returned it, careful and deliberate, her heart quietly affirming the bond they had created. As they prepared for the day, gathering water and supplies for the journey ahead, Naya thought about the choice she had made the night before. She had acted with courage, allowing herself to share warmth and closeness with Jack. She had not betrayed her values. She had honored them by making a conscious, respectful decision. Desire and honor, she realized, could coexist. Her actions were guided not by impulse but by thoughtfulness and empathy. And Jack, through his patience and respect, had shown that he could honor her boundaries while deepening their connection. The day's journey was long, yet it carried a new energy. The physical challenges of the desert were still present: steep rocky paths, hidden crevices, and the ever-present need for water. But the emotional weight had shifted. Naya and Jack moved together with a rhythm born of shared trust. Conversations were easier now, flowing naturally from survival concerns to stories of their pasts, dreams, and hopes. Jack spoke of his life as a cowboy, the places he had seen, and the lessons he had learned on the trail. Naya shared her experiences growing up in her tribe, the traditions she had learned, and the values she held dear. Through these exchanges, they learned more about one another, deepening their understanding and respect. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small, shaded area near a cluster of rocks and a trickling stream. The water was fresh and clean, and the shade offered a respite from the sun's relentless heat. Naya motioned for Jack to rest, and he accepted gratefully, taking a moment to drink and regain energy. She tended to minor scrapes and checked his previous injuries, ensuring that he remained on the path to full recovery. While their focus remained on survival, there was a quiet tenderness in the way they cared for one another, a care that extended beyond mere necessity. As evening approached, the temperature dropped, and the desert's cold returned with a bite sharper than anticipated. Naya and Jack prepared a fire, stacking dry wood carefully to keep the flames steady through the night. The process was familiar now, almost routine, yet each act of preparation carried a deeper meaning. They had shared nights like this before, but tonight felt different. There was a sense of completion, of understanding that the bond between them was not fleeting or temporary. It was enduring, built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. Night fell quickly. The desert, so vast and unforgiving, now seemed like a quiet witness to their connection. Naya allowed Jack to settle closer to the fire, sharing warmth without compromising her own space. She noticed the subtle ways he adjusted to her presence, never overstepping but leaning into the comfort of shared survival. In return, she felt a growing sense of peace, a recognition that the choice she had made to be near him the night before had been the right one. It was not just about desire. It was about connection, understanding, and the courage to embrace vulnerability. They spoke softly, recounting memories from their pasts, reflecting on the days spent navigating the desert, and imagining the life that might lie ahead. Jack expressed his admiration for Nea's courage, her knowledge of the land, and her unwavering sense of duty. Nea, in turn, shared her respect for his resilience, his patience, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. The conversation flowed naturally, bridging the gap between two worlds that had once seemed so separate. Each word reinforced the quiet certainty that their bond was real and meaningful. As midnight approached, the fire burning low, they huddled together once more. The desert's cold was sharp, but the warmth of shared proximity provided comfort far greater than the fire alone. Nea realized that desire and honor had merged into something deeper, a recognition that caring for another, trusting them, and allowing oneself to be close could be an act of true courage. Jack felt the same understanding, recognizing that the connection they shared was built not just on survival, but on mutual respect and the quiet power of shared experience. The night passed peacefully. They took turns keeping watch, ensuring that no dangers approached and that the fire remained safe. Yet even in the quiet, their closeness was evident. They exchanged subtle gestures of care, a hand brushing a stray hair from the face, an arm adjusted to provide warmth, a shared glance in the firelight. The desert, so often hostile, now became a sanctuary for their growing trust and intimacy. Morning arrived gently, with a soft glow over the horizon. Nea and Jack stirred, feeling the strength of shared experience and mutual reliance. The desert around them was vast, but it no longer felt empty. It had become a space of connection, reflection, and the quiet beauty of two people discovering each other amidst hardship. Nea's heart was lighter, filled with the knowledge that she had acted with honor while embracing the desire that had quietly grown between them. The following days were a mixture of travel, rest, and quiet reflection. Nea led Jack with skill and precision, ensuring that they avoided unnecessary dangers and stayed on paths that offered the best chance for survival. Jack's strength returned steadily, bolstered not only by the physical care he received, but by the emotional support and trust that had grown between them. They moved in harmony, a silent rhythm born of shared experience and mutual reliance. As they approached a small settlement at the edge of the desert, Nea's thoughts turned inward. She had faced difficult choices, navigated the tension between duty and desire, and emerged with a bond that was both strong and fragile. She realized that honor was not limited to strict adherence to tradition. It also included the courage to act with empathy, trust, and compassion. Jack, through his patience and respect, had proven himself worthy of that trust. Together, they had created a connection that transcended the harshness of the desert. Arriving at the settlement, they found a brief respite from the challenges of the wilderness. Nea allowed herself a small moment of relief, knowing that the immediate dangers had passed. Yet she also recognized that their journey was not over, not in spirit, and not in the quiet decisions that would shape their lives. They had faced the desert together, and in doing so, had discovered the depth of trust, courage, and affection that could grow between two people under extraordinary circumstances. That evening, as they settled near a fire outside the small settlement, Nea reflected on the lessons of the desert. She had chosen to embrace her feelings for Jack without betraying her values. She had allowed herself to care deeply, to trust, and to act with both wisdom and courage. Jack had mirrored her respect, patience, and strength, creating a partnership that was grounded in more than necessity. It was grounded in understanding, empathy, and the quiet power of shared experience. The desert had tested them in every way, through cold, heat, danger, and uncertainty. But it had also revealed the capacity for connection, trust, and even love. Nea and Jack understood that their bond was not defined by fleeting circumstances, but by the choices they had made and the respect they had shown one another. As they sat together under the stars, sharing warmth and quiet conversation, they felt a sense of completeness. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had forged a bond that neither distance nor time could easily break. In the weeks and months that followed, Naya and Jack continued to navigate their respective worlds, sometimes returning to her tribe, sometimes traveling with him. They maintained their bond through shared respect, patience, and understanding. Naya's courage and wisdom earned her continued honor among her people, and Jack's care and respect strengthened the trust that had begun in the desert. Together, they demonstrated that survival was not only about enduring the harsh elements, but also about cultivating trust, understanding, and a willingness to embrace the human heart. Their story, quietly whispered among those who knew them, became a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the delicate balance between duty and desire. Naya and Jack had faced the desert's trials, had navigated their own emotions, and had emerged stronger, connected, and enriched by the journey. The desert, once a place of danger and solitude, had become the setting of a profound bond, one that would endure in memory and in life.